And then folks should be told that it's going to get cold in Chicago and New York very soon. And there are lots of other places in the country that they might want to consider going. And the White House and the federal government should be facilitating that.
That's Governor J.B. Pritzker Sunday on Face the Nation talking about, hey, it's going to get cold in Chicago and maybe people shouldn't be transported from the southern U.S. border to Chicago. And that's some of the latest where we're at in this conversation concerning the crisis at the border impacting Illinois, which is not a border state, but your tax dollars paying for this in the tune of more than $500 million. And could there be more spending involved here? That's something that's being speculated, especially with state lawmakers heading back to the Springfield Capitol here in Springfield, the state capitol with fall veto session, and they could possibly bring up a supplemental appropriation. That's something that Governor J.B. Pritzker was asked about last week, and here's what he had to say in response to that question of, are state taxpayers going to have to pay more, or are we going to see some type of, shifting of dollars? Here's Governor J.B. Pritzker last week.
As you know, we balanced the budget for this year, and it isn't as if we're coming in with, enormous surpluses. And we always have things that are, an opportunity for us to be of assistance. This is not something where we have hundreds of millions of dollars to support. But remember, we've gone above and beyond. We've taken some of the programs that have pre-existed this crisis and sort of adjusted them to help with the migrant crisis. Let me give you one example. Our rental assistance program, which is very important for helping people that just fall just under the ability to pay their rent. We have provided some of that rental assistance money, which wasn't originally intended to be about asylum seekers, for this challenge.
So again, the governor talking about how they are looking to shift dollars around. So we'll see what that looks like in the wash. And I don't know if that's necessarily something they have to reappropriate, because one thing that's fascinating is we have an ongoing disaster proclamation that the governor has issued since August of 2022, and it's been every 30 days. The governor's been re-upping a disaster proclamation concerning the migrant crisis impacting Chicago. And it seems to be getting worse, again, as you've got growing criticism across the board. And 6 out of 10 polled say that the Biden administration's handling this is not right. And you've got border crossings that are skyrocketing, with some observers blaming the administration for creating the perception that the border is open. But as we saw last week, you've got a couple of different things that the administration's doing, including growing the border wall by constructing more of a physical barrier, but also announcing that they're going to resume deportations of Venezuelans in the country illegally. So those are a couple of the things I think that the White House has felt the pressure on. But again, that doesn't necessarily alleviate the tax dollars that are being used right now for housing migrants, for taking care of migrants in the city of Chicago, and the city of Chicago may be coming to Springfield to seek more state tax dollars. Governor Pritzker saying it's probably not going to happen because there's not hundreds of millions of dollars in the budgets that we can just give to the city of Chicago. Here's Mayor Brandon Johnson's reaction to that.
Help with housing. Have you had that conversation with him and talked about that specifically?
Well, what we've talked about, first of all, I'm grateful for the work that that has been done. And again, the people of Chicago, we're being asked and quite frankly tasked with carrying the vast majority of this responsibility. I know that the leadership in the state of Illinois recognizes the importance of Chicago. And the only thing that I can do is do my part. And I'm asking other folks to do their part. And as I've said multiple times, that the weight and the brunt of this sacrifice has been on Chicagoans. And I'm hearing loud and clear from our Black residents in particular that they have high expectations, as they should. It's why making sure that we pass one fair wage was a priority of mine, because the vast majority of individuals are Black and brown women who are doing the work.
So this is, of course, on Friday that Mayor Brandon Johnson out of Chicago was asked about this, and it was during a news conference we'll actually talk about later on in the program that does away with the tipped wage, and they're moving forward with that. So he kind of worked in the quote, one fair wage ordinance into his response here. But clearly there's more money needed, he says. And he's ongoing in conversations about getting more tax dollars to help with this situation. Here again is more from Mayor Brandon Johnson.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Yesterday, did Speaker Welch promise more migrant funding for Chicago during the veto session? And in general, do you think it's time the state starts looking at cuts elsewhere to provide more migrant grants to the city?
Well, what I've said repeatedly, that the shared sacrifice has to be equitably handled and addressed. And I've had this conversation with Speaker Welch, with the Senate President, with the governor, with the White House. I've had this conversation with our board president. All of us have to step in and lean in to have a shared sacrifice in this dynamic. Look, as I can't emphasize enough that I know that the strain that this has caused on our economy, and particularly within our black neighborhoods. Black people have had to share a lot and endure a lot. And that conversation that I had with the Speaker, the Senate President, the Governor, the Board President, the President of the United States, I'm constantly reminding them that the pressure that continues to be placed on the city of Chicago, and particularly Black Chicago, they have to help alleviate that.
So, again, Johnson saying that, there's some alleviation that needs to happen. And he blames, quote, right-wing extremists. But Mayor Johnson is going to the border. When? Not sure yet, but he's heading there. Just recently, New York's mayor, Eric Adams, returned from the border, and here's some of what he had to say about the issue of more migrants and the messages that are being sent and sanctuary city policies. Here's Eric Adams on Face the Nation earlier this past weekend.
We can't have a rule that one can come from anywhere on the globe and come to New York City and remain in New York City as long as they want, and taxpayers must pick up the cost. This is a $5 billion price tag. This fiscal year, $12 billion over 3 years. That money is coming from somewhere. It's unfair to the migrant seekers and asylum seekers, and it's also unfair to everyday taxpayers, New Yorkers.
And also in Illinois, where it's costing more than $500 million. More from Eric Adams, recently back from his trip down to the southern border. What was the message?
And I wanted to communicate with the local CBOs, local elected leaderships there, and the local citizen and residents to learn from them, but also to send a clear message on their medias. Yeah. New York is out of room.
So New York's out of room. No more room at the inn in New York. Well, what's the message that Governor J.B. Pritzker is wanting to send, especially as the weather gets ready to turn? What's Mayor Brandon Johnson's message moving forward when it comes to migrant base camp tents? We'll get to all of that. Stay tuned.
The Democratic convention's in Chicago next year. Are you confident that your city and your state are going to have a better grasp on it by this time?
I am confident that we can handle it, but again, it will require help from the federal government, and someone needs to work in Texas with these border politicians to have them stop sending people only to blue cities and blue states. And the President of the United States and the White House has the ability to help disperse folks across the country. That will help a lot.
That's Governor J.B. Pritzker Sunday on Face the Nation, and making the statement that, hey, it's the border politicians that need to stop sending these migrants to blue cities and blue states. These blue cities and blue states, by the way, have enacted sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies that make enforcement of federal immigration law relaxed. And that's something that clearly is, according to New York Mayor Eric Adams, it's not something that we can really do anymore because of the exorbitant amount of cost as the border's wide open. And you got the governor here in Illinois saying that's the border politicians. He says we need help from the federal government. but didn't explicitly say close the border, which you would think with the record number of people coming across the border, including just the El Paso sector, 400,000 beating last year's 308,000 encounters. That's just part of the 2.4 or 2.8 million of encounters that they've had, not to mention those who possibly got away. So what is it? Are we just going to throw more money at this, or are we going to close the border? Of course, you've got the president doing some border wall construction, but he downplays it, says it's not going to work, and the only reason they're doing it is to follow the law, they said, as to the money that's going to be responsible for this. But also on Sunday, Governor J.B. Pritzker, not only did he say that border politicians need to fix the situation by not sending migrants to Chicago or blue states, he also said that they need to do something about this because, quite frankly, it's going to start getting cold.
White House and the federal government should be facilitating that. And then folks should be told that it's going to get cold in Chicago and New York very soon. And there are lots of other places in the country that they might want to consider going. And the White House and the federal government should be facilitating that.
Well, if they're going to facilitate that, then those other communities you're looking to send them, they don't have sanctuary city policies. So they may just go ahead and assist in deporting these individuals. But Mayor Johnson recognizing that it's going to get cold in the city of Chicago, and that's why he says he's got a backup to the base camp military-grade tents that he's got a $30 million contract for.
The base camps for asylum seekers, as you have these time constraints, the temperatures are already going to be dropping this weekend. What are you going to do if you can't get those camps up in time to house people?
We've stood up a shelter, one new shelter every 8 days. One shelter every 8 days. Hundreds of buses have come since I've been mayor. I appreciate the spirit of the question. This is not just simply about backup. This is about how we front load our efforts to respond to the crises. I've said this repeatedly. Everything is on the table. Brick and mortar, base camps, the state, the federal government. And so I'm going to continue to do the work that I've been charged to do, is to make sure that we're speaking to the demands that predate this crisis, and we're doing that, while at the same time doing everything in my power to find more brick and mortar space. I'm asking our business leaders to do this, our philanthropic leaders to find locations, our philanthropic community to lean in and support the mutual aid workers and work that's being done on the front lines. And we're still moving forward with the base camps.
So still moving forward with the base camps, but taking an all-in approach. Does that include closing the border?
From the Fly SPI studios, take the easy way